Welcome to the MEND, a podcast for survivors and victims of crime sponsored through the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I'm Anna Nasset, and I will be your host for this bi-monthly podcast and show. Today on the show, we have Kesha Ram here to discuss the power of storytelling and how it can be used to heal and empower. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Anna.
This show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concept for victims of crime. We wanted to acknowledge the healing process and provide resources not only in our state, but throughout the country that could benefit victims of crime as they begin to mend. As your host, I myself am a victim and survivor of crime, and my healing process and how I navigate through the world is an ongoing and ever-evolving process. I went for years from hiding myself and my trauma to standing up and speaking out against crime, and now travel to speak with victim and service providers. I'll share some of the services and resources that I've learned over the years, and also learn about many others with my guests. I, as always, like to offer a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics of healing, but with that in mind, we occasionally hear a story related to crime, discuss our mental health, or other sensitive matters. We urge you to care for yourself as you listen, and listen at your own discretion. As I said, today we have the incredible Kesha Ram on the show. Kesha has served 4 terms in the Vermont House of Representatives on behalf of Burlington from 2008 to 2016. She graduated from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government in 2018 with a master's in public administration and is currently engaged in policy consulting. She has worked for the City of Burlington as a civic engagement specialist and for Steps to End Domestic Violence as the Legal Advocacy Director. She also serves on the board of Planned Parenthood of Northern New England and Vermont Natural Resources Council. Beyond Kesha's growing list of accomplishments, she is also an incredible storyteller. We met a few weeks ago at an event for the Vermont Network for Sexual and Domestic Violence, where we both shared the stage telling stories. And I'm just so excited to have one of my top guests that I've wanted to have on. I'm very honored and thrilled to have you here on the MEND as we talk about the topic of storytelling.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And I'd love to start by just you telling us a little bit about your upbringing and how it led to your life of public service.
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Anna. I don't know how I could repay that kind introduction, and I'm so glad that the Vermont Network did bring us into relationship more formally because I really enjoyed hearing your story and knowing about your bravery. So thank you.
Thank you.
I've always had this complicated upbringing, and it really felt like running for office helped me have to get it out quickly. And I distinctly remember being at a Democratic Labor Day type of event where the focus was really, people were in the audience having a good time. You had to get up and give a rabble-rousing speech. And I was after Attorney General T.J. Donovan and Senator Patrick Leahy, and they were really talking up their Irish credibility. And it just was that kind of Barry Labor Hall environment where you wanted to talk about how Irish Catholic you were. And I got up and I really quickly had to say, well, I'm not Irish Catholic, but I did grow up in my Indian immigrant father and Jewish American mother's Irish pub in Los Angeles. And the crowd pretty much lost it. I had never tried to explain my childhood that quickly. And I really, it was a really healing experience actually for me to run for statewide office because it was right after my father died. And, without trying to use running for office as therapy, it still was really valuable to figure out how to tell my story, who I was, where my beliefs came from, by, reflecting on who my father was, who my mother is, and what they've given me in my upbringing. I really, truly did grow up in an Irish pub in Los Angeles, and it was our family business. But the harder part of the story to talk about is that at some point my mother really started to realize that this relationship was abusive, controlling, and one where she wasn't being appreciated for what she contributed. She had 2 master's degrees. One was an MBA, and she did all the books and the accounting for the business. My father never really appreciated that and was becoming more physically and emotionally and verbally abusive, and she left him. The business started to fall apart without her. She became a single mom with 3 kids, and even with 2 master's degrees, couldn't really find work. that was flexible enough to manage everything. And so, I really had this complicated childhood where we experienced great wealth during the heyday of the pub. We had Arnold Schwarzenegger in there. We had a number of big Santa Monica and Los Angeles type important people. And then, there we were, sort of my mother having boyfriends where she would say, oh, I, forgot my wallet. Do you have $20 I can use for groceries? And that would be our groceries for the week. So, it was a really complicated childhood that doesn't lend itself well to talking about all that complexity when you're running for office or you're not trying to tell a story geared towards the ups and downs of life.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And thank you I think it's really important when you embrace everything that has shaped you as you walk into this public space. And it's interesting. My own father passed away, and that's what led to me being a public speaker.
Wow.
So I can definitely resonate with that.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry about your father.
Same with you.
Yeah.
So can you share with our listeners how storytelling has folded into your life and your career and has aided in your expressing the wins and the losses and the grief and everything?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really look back at even that period of time and much later in life and think about how afraid my mother was to tell that story, any part of that story, whether it was the abuse, which she still doesn't talk about, or, seeing me talk about the financial stress and challenges. She has a lot of pride, and I had to let go of that to get help in life in a lot of ways. She was the kind of woman who was very independent and said, I want you to follow your dreams and go to college, but I don't have any money. So knowing that if you were a free lunch kid meant that you could take the SATs for free and, would mean that your college applications are free or low cost was really important. But we weren't free lunch kids. She would scrape it together, and she served on our local food co-op board, so we had lunches. But I said, Mom, I'm going to go on the free lunch program, and actually the food's pretty good, and this is going to be part of my story. This is going to help me get to college. And so later on in life, talking about being financially insecure was important to me to break that stigma for others, and to make sure they knew that as much as it's hard, it's difficult, it's very vulnerable to talk about who you are, it can open some doors. At the same time, being a policymaker, we shouldn't always force people to divulge every detail of their life to get help.
Right.
It can be a great connector, but it can also be, incredibly voyeuristic to have to know that somebody's a worthy victim to get support, or, they've done everything right to get financial assistance from the government. So I always tried to be judicious about telling my story and make sure people understood that some people aren't going to advocate for themselves the way we think they should in order to access government services. And we always have to be cognizant of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I get emails all the time from other victims who just like, how have you done this? I'm like, I have advocated for myself so hard. Mm-hmm. And that's not what everyone can do.
Exactly.
And that's okay. However you choose to navigate that and however you choose to share. And yeah, I mean, it took me 7.5 years to be able to tell my story.
Absolutely.
And just the coming to terms with that.
Yeah.
And realizing that in some ways it doesn't define us, it shaped us, but we're so much more as we move into our future.
Exactly. And I remember growing up trying to explain to people, oh, my parents got divorced because of cultural differences, because he's Indian and she's Jewish, and that was too hard to work out. They came from different cultures. And that's a disservice to Indian culture. It's not full of people who are controlling and angry all the time and yelling all the time. And I had to learn that as I grew up and learn a new way to talk about a very uncomfortable part of my life. And I just commend your bravery, because it took me becoming the legal advocacy director at Steps to End Domestic Violence to learn how hard it is for women and victims who haven't experienced physical violence, because that's still what society honors and recognizes. And to have women, especially women, but all kinds of survivors say, I wish he would just punch me in the face because that's the only way I'm going to get help, was so jarring for me, and such an education in what that emotional and verbal and financial abuse looks like that can surround a victim and survivor without them being able to get help from the system.
Absolutely, yeah. And we need more people that are going to stand up and stand beside victims who aren't having that physical done to them. And it's how you're able to articulate and tell your story as you're trying to get these services.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember one experience when I was approached first through a male ally who was helping a small group of women who were trying to see if they could get anywhere addressing revenge porn in the state of Vermont. The idea that you might have explicit images or videos of you, doctored or real, that either you didn't know were being taken or you didn't want to be shared with a larger audience. And that might be held against you by an abusive partner or someone that you've had an intimate relationship with, or anybody really who, and these women, really came to me to talk about how it was hurting their reputations, their careers, to be victims of revenge porn. And I worked with Representative Maxine Grad, your local wonderful representative, on this issue. I first of all remember when I was on the Vermont Digger article about it, and there was my picture, all of a sudden I had this terrorizing fear of, oh my goodness, there's people who do this work nationally who don't even publish their contact information because of how harassing men can be around this. Thankfully, I didn't experience that, but I had this moment of terror of just, what does that feel like to be a victim of this kind of horrible crime that isn't a crime in many states? So we passed the bill, and when we had a signing of the bill at Hope Works, one of the people who came to me with her initial issue and the experience she was having was there, and I really was hoping we could celebrate her, and she didn't want that. Yep. And it was an important moment to think about how she wanted to kind of celebrate by being peripheral to that event and watching it happen. And so afterwards, the governor gave me the pen for signing the bill, and I privately gave it to her. And I just really honor, we often really want people to have to tell their stories publicly to get likes on Facebook and sympathy and pats on the back and, to help the next generation. There's a lot of noble reasons to tell your story, but it also can be really noble to honor yourself and to not tell your story if that's not what you want to do.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I know for myself and telling my story when I go out, it's really, before I ever started doing that on like a public forum, was really had to check myself of like, why am I doing this? What is the motivation? Yeah. Because somebody had told me, you'd be great at public speaking and telling your story. And I was like, well, what's the reason behind this? Right. And for me, it's in service to others. Exactly. And like that's my driving force in everything I do, is that this is in service to others so that others can benefit and get the same resources that I have gotten, because that's what everyone deserves. But definitely had to really gauge that and look at my own safety within that, of going, okay, well, if this man gets out of prison, my website shuts down, everything shuts down. Right, I might be changing my name.
Exactly. Wow.
But luckily I have 10 years to wait for that. But yeah, there is those things of looking at your own safety within that too.
Exactly. So. And for people who may not have had the opportunity, which is a great one, to hear from Tarana Burke, the woman who started the Me Too movement. We don't know exactly where those words came from, and we just say, yeah, me too, that's so empowering. But it really, she tells this incredible and poignant story about working with young girls, and a young girl coming to her and talking to her, opening up to her about sexual abuse, and her having such a hard time saying me too, and wondering where that comes from inside to not be able to get those words out. And I really love, in this very sad way, that deeper understanding of what the Me Too movement really grew out of, which is how many forces in society keep us from being able to say Me Too and tell our own story. And that's why I just hope people look up to Tarana Burke and understand where the Me Too movement really originated.
Yeah. I got to hear her tell that story 2 years ago, and I was in an audience of like 2,000 people, and I found my front row seat. I was like, I am right here.
Tears.
Oh gosh, yes, I sobbed through the whole thing just about. But she's an incredible storyteller and speaker, and that's the other side of it. Is I have women all the time. They're like, I didn't want to post Me Too. I didn't want my children to know. I didn't want my husband to know. I didn't want my friends to know.
Yeah, and that stigma
yeah,
we carry, it can really erode us.
But it's okay to have that quietness as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as you've moved through, I know that you faced a lot of hurdles growing up, as well as in your career, and how has I'm like, just a few.
Fair. Yeah.
That's a fair assessment. As much as you'd like to share, how has storytelling helped you heal and continue to move forward into the work that you're doing now and into what you kind of are dreaming your life into becoming?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it feels so rich to reflect back and think about those hurdles, and many of them had to do with being a very young woman of color running for office in Vermont. That is not, a common sight here still. And I was the first woman of color to represent Burlington in the legislature. I was the first woman of color to get double digits in a statewide race. And that didn't come without a cost of people constantly saying, don't play the race card, don't play the gender card. At one point, a good friend and campaigner said, my dad called you a jigaboo, and I don't even know what that means. And it took me a second of sort of being startled to say, I have to reach back almost 100 years for
Right.
remembering when that was a slur. But those kinds of experiences are hard to talk about in Vermont still. And especially when women of color are leading, and they are around the country, people go directly to calling them names that have to do with their gender and their race. And when you combine that, it's an incredibly oppressive force. And it really throws you off your game, even if you're doing your best to lead. And, it was a lot of time in Vermont when people said, it can't be that bad, or, this must be a very isolated incident, or, you just shouldn't talk about it because it's not positive. People don't want to hear about these things. In a way, perhaps due to the Trump administration and just things, the sheen coming off of what American race relations look like at this point, and how much progress we think we've made, and the realities that we're facing now, a lot more people in Vermont are willing to have this conversation and to say, I have made assumptions, or I have not challenged assumptions. And that may have led to who is successful in this state, or who has access to power, or, how people are seen as professional or successful. And so now I'm just having all of those conversations with municipal government, the towns in our state, and school districts and organizations that are all on this journey. And over time, I hope they can more and more be in relationship with each other around shared learning. But it's such a rich time where you have towns all over the state who say, we want to create a diversity statement or a welcoming positive statement. And then they step back and say, what does that mean? What happens when we have
We've
that
got
in
some
place?
problems here.
Exactly, yeah. So, what I hope it isn't is a time where people think, well, I just won't say anything because I feel shut down, or I feel like I might have offended somebody. What we need is people to really think and process out loud to the best of their ability, so we can work through these issues together, because nobody has all the answers, but we're only going to find them if we speak together about what that looks like is a lot of violence that people have experienced, a lot of hostility in their life, and a lot of setbacks from a system that was rigged against them from a very long time ago. And I think Vermont's always felt like, we never had that problem. We abolished slavery a long time ago, but we're now having a reckoning. We're having a civil rights movement now, because we're becoming a more diverse state. And I'm just really happy to be able to be, hopefully, a cultural broker or a bridge, or somebody who can help both sides come together in that case.
That's so awesome. That's incredible. And you and I were talking beforehand, just, all of these injustices and things that have happened in our past have shaped us and now allowed us to dream into a future where we get to use them for good.
Yes.
And we get to hopefully see change. And it's not easy. And I just have such admiration for you.
Oh,
and
thank you.
Yeah.
Right
absolutely.
back to you. I do think, as hard as it's really easy. It looks easy for an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or a woman who's made it somewhere where no one can take that power away from her, to say, keep speaking up, even if people tell you to wait your turn. It might look easy, but it's incredibly difficult. What any woman, particularly women, or a person of color does on any given day to keep speaking up. And so my hope is, and I love that you have this show, just to keep giving people that hope that if I can tell one person or a number of people what I'm experiencing and help make sense of it, then I can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. We're two examples of that. So
I'd like to think so.
It's pretty awesome. So my guest today is Kesha Ram, and we are talking about the power of storytelling. Kesha, can you share with our listeners how storytelling has helped you in your various campaigns, and for others who might be seeking to run for office, how that can be a real tool of power? I think you gave a great example with the town hall that you were talking about, Labor Day.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great example. But yeah, if you could just kind of further expand upon that.
Well, it's a great question because it helps people. I talk about it all the time when young people are thinking about running for office. It can be really daunting. And to be fair, you don't know everything there is to know about tax policy and healthcare. And you may know less than a person you're running against or somebody else who wants a position who is older than you and has paid taxes longer. But nobody can claim to have the absolute knowledge and experience it takes to run for office and to serve in office. And so the best thing you can do when you're hit with a hard question or you're in a debate and you're asked something where you don't feel like you know all the answers and all the solutions right away is to talk about your personal story and start from there. And that was something no one could take away from me. I challenged 2 male incumbents. The first thing they said about me in the press was in the local school newspaper. They said, I'd be curious to know what she thinks she brings to the table. And it could have really knocked me off my block. And I could have said, I don't know what I bring to the, I've been student body president and I teach preschool locally. And I think I have a lot of things I bring to the table, which I articulated. But at the end of the day, if someone asked a question about some really detailed housing policy in the State House, and I was passionate about housing, but I hadn't gotten there yet, I could still talk about how I would be the only renter to serve in the legislative body, and pivot back to, I don't know if I have all the answers right now, but I have a life experience that's valid and relevant. And frankly, the legislature is not very diverse in terms of people's life horizons. Are they right now facing the crises that younger generations are facing of student debt, trying to afford a home, trying to figure out what their financial footing is going to look like? It looks very different. And so we keep saying we want more young people. Where are the young people? Well, you need to feel like you have something to offer when you run, and what you have to offer is your personal experience. So start with your story, and you often can't go wrong. And start with the stories of the people who you talk to at the door. I was running for office without health care. It was pre-ACA.
Yeah.
And, my mother's health care policy kicked off anyone over the age of 18 in the family. So there I was, 21, knocking on doors, afraid, what if I cross the street and I get hit by a car? I don't have health insurance. And then I talked to my neighbors who, had multiple sclerosis and had to choose between, food and prescription drugs, or somebody whose brother got in a car accident and didn't know how they were going to pay the medical bills. And I realized my struggle is not different than my neighbors, and I'm just going to promise them to take their story to Montpelier and do something about it. And that I can do, even if I can't, solve all their problems right away. So the power of story is incredibly real, and it helped connect me with neighbors who, otherwise we might not have a whole lot in common or agree on a whole lot of things, but we could, share stories, and that made a difference.
And that's so powerful, because in their story, even if they're not telling it, they know that it matters.
Exactly.
Like, that's an incredibly powerful thing for everyone who's voting.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Just one story. I know I'm telling lots of stories, but it's kind of how I think and talk. I knocked on the door of one woman who someone had said, oh, somewhere in that neighborhood there's a woman who's really, really, pro-life and doesn't support abortion, and you might want to be thinking about how you talk to her if you knock on her door. So I knock on somebody's door. I had no idea at the time that that's who I was talking to, and she invited me into her house, and we were starting to have a cup of tea. And, she was very opposed to abortion, she made clear, and she started asking me my thoughts on it. And I realized who this was, and I thought, oh, maybe we could agree on, reducing teen pregnancies, or maybe we could agree on trying to get people better healthcare services so they don't have to make that choice in the future. And no, we couldn't agree on any of that. And so I'm sitting there sipping tea and just saying, well, we may not agree, but I'll be here to listen to you. I can tell you that much. And she kind of takes a deep breath and looks at me and says, do you like opera? And I said, yes, I do. I sing soprano one, and we found a way to talk about opera and relate on that front. And she said, okay, you have my vote. And,
That's amazing.
that was it. I mean, she wasn't going to get somebody who aligned with her political views in Burlington, Vermont necessarily. Thankfully, in my mind, we're a very pro-choice state. But, we could find something where we could stay in conversation. And sometimes that's all that matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to the power of listening and the fact that we can always find something to connect on.
Exactly.
And especially in this culture where we're always looking for the things we can argue on, when we can find those connections, it's so important. And I know for me, I'm from Ohio, from a very, very conservative state, from a very conservative family, and yet we just listen and we share and we connect. And we might vote completely differently, but that's okay because we still connect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was just talking to somebody today who said that her son, who's in elementary school, witnessed a screaming match between a young boy who was saying a lot of things that were being perceived as racist on the playground, and a young boy who was screaming in his face, that's racist, you shouldn't say those things, that's racist. And she was trying to talk to her son about what to do in that situation. And what was interesting, as she described the situation, she said the boy who kept saying things that were being perceived as racist was saying, well, is this racist? And is this racist? And what about this? And it was kind of in a taunting way. But I pointed out to her, actually, he sounds like the only one who was asking any questions. And, I'm not defending what he was saying. It could have really hurt some people, but it sounded also like he was really crying out for some attention and had some other things going on. But what would have been different if the other boys weren't screaming at him, you're racist, but were asking, why do you feel that way? What, why do you think that? What makes you, think it's okay to say that if it hurts people? Do you know you're hurting people? Being a little more curious about each other could go a long way right now, because otherwise I said that screaming match sounds exactly like what's happening in the country.
Yes,
We're just not listening to each other. We're just screaming at each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I think sometimes we feel uncomfortable to ask questions, we're embarrassed or all of those things, but it's like if we ask questions, we can all learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A little compassion and curiosity can go a long way right now.
Yes, for sure. With that in mind, how do you kind of envision a better future moving forward, kind of coming off of a story like that, where both of everyone's stories are shared, and how we can make a lasting difference in our communities by listening and communicating our stories?
That's a great question, because I am a little bit old-fashioned about social media. I think it has immense power as a tool, and I think more and more people are turning to video and ways to get out more content rather than one tweet that has however many characters. I've lost track because Twitter is not my favorite platform. But, I do think that people are hungry for the handwritten letter and the storytelling forum, much like what we were involved in. They want to hear each other and experience each other face to face and in an intimate setting. And, I think the more we can instill that joy, curiosity, love of humanity in our kids, the better, because they're starting to lead really isolated lives. For us, it was like instant messenger and being able to be really mean to each other on instant messenger because you're behind a computer screen.
Right.
And now kids face, really harsh realities of what is okay to say, frankly, in the public sphere and how to navigate that. I think helping young people really still have those personal interactions is going to be really critical to our humanity moving forward. I hate to sound, really down on new forms of communication, because they're really exciting and I think they have a role to play, but certainly while recognizing that nothing can take the place of, physical touch. I always say, when people ask me, what happens if you lose your race, when I was such a young person running, I said, what other college graduate do you know has knocked on every single one of their neighbors' doors, looked in their eyes, heard their hopes and dreams? I'm really fortunate, regardless of whether or not I win this election, I'll do something valuable with this. And, that is a powerful gift that, we have to stay hungry for.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Yeah, you're a collector of stories as well as an orator of them. So we've talked a lot about stories today and the power of them. And one thing that I thought would be fun and a little bit different than what I usually do is if we had Kesha tell a story today. and I know she had a few she was
I
choosing
know,
from,
right.
so I'm just going to let her do whatever she wants and just share a short story with us for a few minutes.
Well, thank you. And if you've heard Anna tell a story, it has this beautiful way of arcing that I'm still working on, because my stories come fast and furious and passionately. But, I have given some thought to this story, and I've told it before because it really honors for me so much of what we've been talking about. And that is, the power of what our ancestors have given us and the stories that they've given us, even if they didn't have to say any words. My grandmother was a really important figure in my life. My Dadi ji, that's how you speak of your father's mother in Hindi. And she likes to say that I waited for her when I was born, because she flew from India to live with us and move in with us the day before I was born. And then I arrived, and I was the youngest of 3, so she really took me under her wing. I became hers, really, her charge. And she was really intent on teaching me cursive, and I would take dictation on her front porch. She lived in the backyard in a guest house. By the time I was 2, we were working on cursive and reading and writing. And so this felt a little bit like abuse and torture. It was not. I am not a victim of that kind of crime. My grandmother was a lovely woman, but it was really intense. It was hard. And at the same time, it made me so much of the person I am today, the person who's really comfortable speaking and telling stories and articulating and speaking up for myself. And so when she passed away in 2010, it was really hard for me to sort of make sense of all of it and find a sign that I could move forward. She was such an important, influential person in my life. We went to India, as is customary, to bring her ashes to the Holy River, which our family has done for thousands of years in Hardwar. And that was a beautiful ceremony, but it didn't give me the closure I needed. And my father was with us at the time. It would be 5 years before he passed away, and we did the same thing for him. And he took us to the part of India that they had spent their final years in India before moving to the United States. And that was a very complicated thing, because my father and his family were refugees from the part of India that became Pakistan. My grandmother always talked about how they lost all of their wealth and left with the clothes on their backs and fled to the other part of Punjab. And so we saw the last house that they lived in before they left, and it was this horrible little cement block painted a million times with really clashing colors. And I thought, I'm never going to find the closure I need from seeing this small modest cement house in a dusty road. And then we met these caretakers for the school next door. It was a woman and her 5-year-old daughter, and they didn't speak any English. And my father and my aunt were helping to translate as they talked about the property to the best of their ability. And so my aunt and father were trying to tell stories about my grandmother and my grandfather and their life there. And finally, my aunt looked up and saw these beautiful glossy mango trees. And they weren't giving fruit at that point, but they had beautiful leaves. You could tell they were incredibly healthy. And my aunt said, your grandmother planted those mango trees. I remember that. And she talked about how my grandmother would get on the bus. She never learned to drive, as customary for older Indian women. She would get on the bus and drive all over the region to find the best mango saplings. And everyone in the family thought she was crazy. And my grandfather would yell at her, you're spending all this time on the bus and who knows where you're going, and it's dangerous to get the best mango saplings. Like, is this really that important? And she then translated that story for the caretaker and her daughter, and their eyes got really wide. And the caretaker explained that when the trees are bearing mango fruit, it is the most abundant tree in the entire region. And all the kids at the school gorge themselves on the mangoes, and it like feeds everybody. And they're just the best mango trees in the whole region. And, of course, my aunt and father were getting a really good laugh out of that, and it helped them, I think, a lot too. But I really came to realize that in many ways I was another one of my grandmother's mango trees, that people might have thought you're spending too much time. In fact, you're suffocating this small living creature. But it really spoke to that idea that the meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you never sit, or mango trees, that you'll never eat the fruit of. And it really, really helped me to sort of picture my grandmother doing things that were inexplicable to everybody else that had such a lasting legacy, and to know that I'm included in that.
That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing. For those who aren't watching and are listening, I'm getting a little teary-eyed over here. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it was really nice just to sit and listen, too.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I think there's such a power to just sitting and listening. And just being able to just intently listen and not respond when somebody is sharing. So thank you for giving me the gift of listening to you.
Yeah, it might be a little hard to do that on TV, but you were doing so great, I forgot I was on TV, so thank you.
Absolutely. Kesha, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And as we wrap up this episode, is there anything you would like to share that we haven't covered?
I mean, the word namaste means the light in me honors the sacred light in you. And I really just feel so blessed that you gave me this time to explore story and my story and your story. And I just hope for anyone at home it gave you a little more courage, even if it's to yourself, telling your story, developing your narrative, because it shapes so much of your outlook and your ability to put one foot in front of the other every day.
I love that. Thank you. Namaste to you. Thank you. Thank you again for being here today. It has been such an honor to have you on the MEND and discuss the healing and empowering practices of storytelling. It is a subject near and dear to my heart, as you know, and I've loved creating this episode with you. I am excited to watch your journey continue to unfold and stand with you in solidarity in whatever you do.
Thank you.
I always like to close with a positive message that you want to, just a little final statement. I mean, I think you kind of did that, but just
oh goodness,
a little sentence or something like that to listeners who are victims, survivors, providers.
Yes. One of my mantras is a sort of Nandini Krishnamurti quote, which is, "It is no measure of health to adjust to a profoundly sick society." It's no measure of health to adjust to a profoundly sick society. So I don't want to say that's a positive thing, but I just want to say for everyone struggling with our current reality or the things you're going through, you don't have to adapt in order to be a successful, healthy human. You have to get through it and find the safety and support and health that you need. So don't bend to the will of others when you feel like there's a path forward that's uniquely your own.
Thank you. That's a very good closing message. So that does it for this week, my friends. If you're interested in learning more about the work that Kesha Ram is doing, you can look her up on Facebook. So that's probably the best way. And her name is spelled Kesha, and her last name is Ram, Ram. So thank you so much. And also for others who are listening, if you want to hear more storytelling, a great resource, I think, is The Moth, which is a podcast. And you can look up events in your area or listen to them on the podcast. As usual, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out. You can find me at anna@standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nasset, and it's been an honor to share with you this week. Thank you so much for joining me on the MEND.